Hello, everybody. Welcome along to the Event Industry News podcast. My name is James Dickson, and as ever, it's a very good morning, afternoon, or evening to all of our podcast listeners, whenever or wherever you tune into our podcast from. And on today's episode, we're going to be looking at consumers and their attitudes towards events. Consumers in both B2C and B2B spaces are more conscious than ever about which companies they interact with, the impact that those companies may have on the planet, the wider society. Events are absolutely no different to this. And certainly it's a topic that I suppose pre-pandemic was gathering momentum. Inevitably, the pandemic caused us all to rethink things, and there were other priorities, certainly in the events industry. As we start gathering momentum again in the live event space, it's important that we take a look at some of those subjects and what impact audiences and their attitudes are having in terms of a driver on event organisers' attitudes themselves. We bring on today's guests. Louise Findlay-Wilson is the Managing Director at Energy PR and joins us today for the first time to talk about this very subject. Louise, a very warm welcome to the Event Industry News podcast.
Thank you, James. Lovely to be here.
As I said at the top there, Louise, consumers are very, very conscious about companies that they interact with. They're conscious about when they go somewhere, what's happening. There is this social awareness, I suppose, that is more prominent than ever within society. And I don't know whether you agree with what I said right at the top there, that in the events industry, attitudes towards the planet, towards operating greener events, sustainable events, was gathering a certain element of momentum pre-pandemic that was almost sort of lost a little bit, and it feels like we've had to gather this again. What's it been like, and what's your take on that particular subject?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the pandemic has changed us in so many ways. It's been quite sort of a worn out old topic, really, in a way, because we've talked about it such a lot. But it has changed people, and I think we've become very sensitive to our values and what we hold dear, and the planet has become has always been a burgeoning subject, but has become much more important to people. And I think we're more cynical and sensitive to what organisations are telling us that they're doing, and we're finding it much easier, obviously, to share the news when we find somebody's made a slip up or isn't doing what they said they were doing. So it's added a lot of heat to an already warm subject for event organisers and all those suppliers in that space.
And of course, working in the world of PR, you'll know full well the impact that and how quickly negative and positive communications can spill out from an event, from any particular gathering of people. And I suppose it's not just now the negativity that could spill from an event happening from people attending that event and maybe not being satisfied or happy with how one particular element of it is conducted. But if that happens in advance, this is why organisers need to be aware of it more than ever, is that they actually run the risk of having no audience at all coming to their event if they're not seen to be doing the right thing.
Yeah, I think event organisers, to their credit, have always been pretty aware of the multiple audiences that they've got to please, and they've got if it's an exhibition type event, they've got exhibition exhibitors to please and get on board. They've got visitors to attract. They've got their own staff to keep motivated and excited. They've got a media that feeds all of that they need to keep on side. And I think they've been pretty savvy and sensitive to that. It's just that the landscape has changed such a lot that these days we go to work and we've got our, if it's a B2B event, we've got our business hat on and we're buying whatever, but we're also, as humans, we've got lots of sensitivities around the environment or corporate social responsibility. Maybe our company has a policy around that as well, and that's an extra dimension that event organisers now need to really take on board. And a lot of them have historically done great things in that space and are doing more, and others are putting it much more centrally to their plans. And as always, we've found as an agency that does the PR for a number of events and has had to be sort of sensitive to how news spreads and how audiences are. We've had to wrap into our work, social channels as well as mainstream media, as well as what's the event experience like for everyone who's there. And it's a lot for organisers to deal with, and but they're savvy organisations, and they're full of clever people who are sharpening up all aspects of their work, really.
Absolutely, and this all, I suppose, relates to how socially aware our social consciousness, that seems to have really sharpened up, to use your phrase, a lot in the last few years. And I'm talking about simple little things, plastic cups. People are so aware now. Oh, hold on, I don't want a glass of water out of that. That's plastic. Is that going to be recycled? Demanding that their coffee or their drink is served in something recyclable, a cardboard or a paper, cup. Simple little things like that. I know it might not seem a lot to some people who are listening to this, but I really think there has been this real sort of shift, in attitude as a whole, towards being aware of stuff like that. And it's that awareness that ultimately drives it, because people just won't put up with it anymore.
No, I think we'll often look at something now, and maybe 10 years ago we wouldn't have done it, but we'll look at something, we'll think, well, that looks really wasteful, or that bin looks full of a whole load of mixed. We're used to our rubbish being separated, and we expect, and I think we, as a society, we're much more attuned to all of that. And I mean, it's really interesting. We did some research around what makes people love a brand of any shape or form, and it can be a B2B brand, an event, it can be a consumer brand. So, the broadest sense of the word brand. And there were three crucial things that drove that love, us really getting excited about an organization or a brand. And the three things were nothing to do with price or customer service or innovation, which you think of how much time and energy companies expend on innovating, and quite rightly so. It's a huge thing. But the three things were, I want them to have, I love them if they've got values that fit with my values. We love brands that kind of fit and reflect our lifestyles, and feel therefore in tune with us. And it's that kind of thing that makes us much more likely to recommend an organization, to buy from it, to return to it time and time again. We want brands that we feel we can identify with, that fit with our sense of self, our self-identity. So if, as a business person in a B2B environment, our organization has an approach that's greener now, and that's or has an active corporate social responsibility approach, which lots of organizations do, they work in communities or what have you, they kind of want to feel that when they, from the events they go to as well. And so it's a much more sophisticated thing than just put me in a room with all the right kinds of organizations that I can buy from or sell to. I mean,
and it's gone way beyond just having your CSR statement at the back end of your website buried somewhere, in the sort of the about us section. And I suppose from your perspective as a PR agency, that presents to you a great opportunity from a communications point of view when you're working with a client. If you're working with an event, and I know you have done, where there is a really major consideration towards sustainability, towards having these values, that gives you more opportunity, doesn't it, from a comms point of view?
Absolutely. I mean, we work with a couple of shows where as you would expect, these issues become quite sensitive. So we work with the Packaging Innovation Show. Well, packaging is a very hot topic,
potato,
very hot potato.
Indeed.
Well, they've had a zero to landfill philosophy for ages, and have a huge eco dimension to the show. But they've also taken lots of trouble around, educating the market and the wider world around packaging's role, because it can have as I say, a very loaded sort of connotation, but it's also a vital bit of our existence. It makes food last, and food waste is a huge environmental issue too. So, and then equally we've worked with on the plant-based world, which is a food show, and in the green room everything's plant-based. So there's not and we have to. The show quite rightly honours that and respects that, because the journalists who are attending expect it. The visitors want to, they don't want that compromise. They want it to be absolutely true to that value, and
Yeah,
it's great, and it's a powerful thing when shows like that get behind the essence of what they're about, and are very proactive.
and
But
I'd just like to ask on the packaging innovations show. I've
mm,
just scribbled down event driving its audience, because of the packaging innovation show, the people who are exhibiting there presumably are
mm,
companies who deliver packaging.
absolutely,
That's what they're there to
yeah,
showcase. So if the event itself has a zero to landfill policy,
mm,
then if their exhibitors and the people coming weren't doing that already,
yeah.
then it's going to look pretty foolish on them if they're doing anything that doesn't time with the ethos of the show. That to me sounds like an example of a show actually driving the audience that it serves.
Yeah, I think with B2B shows where there's quite a sophisticated argument, or a sophisticated marketplace. So in a way, they've got to provide a platform for things like plastics to be debated, because there are still going to be plastics packaging companies at the show, and plastics have a role. So it's just however the debate is more around things getting reused and this circular economy, so that we don't have the wastage. If all plastics got reused and repurposed and constantly stayed in a cycle, we wouldn't have a problem with plastics. That's the so and I think the challenge for a show like that, which they do brilliantly, if I say so myself, because they are a very, very
Mm,
impressive show, is that they provide a forum for that very grown-up debate and serious debate that the industry expects to happen,
yeah.
to take place, because the people attending the show are people who buy they are packaging buyers from big retailers and food brands and so on and so forth. So they're in that world and expect it to cover the full spectrum for them, and for them to be able to see all
Mm.
the new technologies and the latest developments, and have those very grown up debates. So it's very, very interesting. But I think, moving aside from even that B2B show, I see right across the event space lots of players. You see venues that are doing community activities, making available their
Yeah,
space
yeah.
for other things. There's lots of really good stuff going on, which I think is admirable and shows how attuned the events industry is to it all now.
Yeah, and it's interesting you mentioned that about event spaces being
Mm,
used. I suppose I don't know if you call it downtime, but
mm,
ultimately any event space wants to be booked out,
mm.
365 days a year, because then it will make money. But
Yeah, yeah,
inevitably there are times when big event spaces are not in use, and I guess that there's got to be a cost to maintaining that space, even if there's no one using it. So why not open it up for a bit of community use, or you use
yeah,
that,
yeah.
offer it out for community engagement.
I think we've got to be realistic with what's doable for them, and what because if you ask lots of companies, well, you've got an office space that you're not using all the time. What are you doing with your community? They're not. We're not.
Yes, yes.
Because especially now with half of us working from home a lot of the time. There's a lot of things that I think it's very easy. I think of venues are they're a very visible target. Because they're well known. Big buildings that we look at and we go, okay, well, so who's sponsoring you and what are you doing? And they're very easy targets to pick on. But I think a lot of them. I was reading about a lot of the independent music venues that are now doing. I think there was some initiative I was reading about where they're providing community sort of venues for community activities, and around the country when they're not in use. And these were these little independent music venues that were otherwise struggling, and their plight
Yeah,
was very much heightened during the
it
pandemic.
certainly was. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's wonderful. And it reflects that general mindset and will that I think the whole industry actually has. I think it's a really big groundswell now.
Mm. When you start, I suppose, deep diving into this subject,
Mm,
and get beyond the the basics that events like to do now, which is having recycling bins, as you alluded to, having, you know, minimal amount of single-use plastic,
Yeah.
encouraging people to bring their own refillable water bottles and putting water stations out. You know, that's pretty commonplace now
Yeah.
in a lot of events. But then when you go actually beyond that and you start thinking about it, when I think back to the communications that would be sent out in advance of an event, you know, 18 years ago or something, when I started, a lot of paper being used,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of written communication, even things like exhibitor manuals. You know, back in 2005, you'd still have this you know, thick wad of paper land on your desk that you had to fill out by hand and then post
Oh
back.
gosh, yeah.
I'm just wondering, from a communications point of view, and this is something that you'll be very in tune with, I'm sure, is there a desire, not just because of how quickly it can be delivered, but using digital communications because they reduce the physical paper that's required?
I think so. I think I think there's been a very natural trend towards that for quite a little while. And you're right. I think it's been the twin things of it's cost effective and efficient and what have you. But there's also and again, I think it plays back to our earlier point of where we all as consumers just look and think, gosh, do I really need, you know, a great big book like that? And do I really want to, you know, so because our expectations have changed, I think events organisers are very in tune with that. And, you know, so now you see the technology where you can visit stands and barcode scanning that sends you all the information directly to your, you know, so there's no carting around of brochures and brochureware.
Yes, the carrier bag full of brochures and leaflets that go in the boot of your car and then get thrown away 6 months later.
Yeah, a little bit like that. I mean, not all of them but I definitely think, and it's convenient for the visitor. You know, you're going around, you're not lugging a load of stuff anymore. It's much easier experience. So yeah, I think there's a very natural desire to limit paper usage generally in lots of organizations, and it seems an obvious way to do it.
But I suppose as well, again, the PR and marketing and communications, it's all about nowadays touch points, isn't it? Finding, you know, touch points between the event, or, you know, where the brand and their audience or their attendees, whoever they may be. And to me, these opportunities also create more touch points, don't they? That they create more opportunities. So if they do it in the right way and they really identify with what's happening here, you know, that they're actually creating more touch points to engage with their audiences.
Absolutely. And I think it's a virtuous thing. I think you can do, you know, if you're doing some kind of charitable tie-up, which everyone feels good about, you know, and it's an organization, a charity that the industry has some connection with, or it, you know, which or it fits with the organizer's brand in some shape or form, and everyone gets that, then it provides a lovely opportunity for, you know, yes, you can do all the touch points around our event and the build up and XYZ's come on board and these speakers, isn't this great, and all of that lovely build up you quite rightly expect. But then you also get wrapped into it some of that content around, you know, your visit is making a difference and this is how we've helped the charity this year, and we all feel good about that. We feel we're human and we want to know that our work in life has as much value as possible, and doing good things makes us feel good. And so you can often see charitable challenges or suppliers getting involved, because there's a vast network of suppliers involved in any event, and they too want to be, I think they want to do the right thing and be and have their own CSR desires to meet, because they're all employing young people, and young people want to work in organizations where that stuff's happening. I mean, it's inevitable.
They really do, don't they? And you know, from a social media point of view, of course, you know, the aim from any sort of activity is from a brand point of view and an event point of view, is to get people to share it. And of course, if they're putting out messages that tie in with the values of their audience, that to me is straight away going to encourage, if you know, somebody who gets that and goes, do you know what, that's really good, I'm really impressed with what that event's doing, I'm going to share that with my friends and tell them, look at what these guys are doing. It's actually encouraging that activity that ultimately the marketeers want to happen.
Yeah, absolutely. You're so right, James. And I think it makes, I think it makes the event, the activity more shareable. It makes people feel good to be involved. I think the employees feel good about it. It makes people selling around an event feel good. It's. I think it's a very virtuous circle, in the true sense of the word. In every way, because it just makes. It makes these organisations feel rounded, and if you're thinking about going to a show, or getting involved in an event, and you know that the organisers have that ethos, or the event has that ethos, or is doing this extra dimension, it's just yet another reason. And I think these days people warm to that.
Yeah,
Yeah, very much so.
I think they do. And what's interesting, I don't know if you've any experience or can offer any sort of insight in this, is to the values and I suppose that sort of social responsibility and green responsibility, if we can call it that takes place before and after an event's taken place. Because a lot of the communications, a lot of the messages from events will rightly be towards their audience, to the people who are actually coming to it. And if we use a trade show as an example,
Yeah,
trade shows, I've seen them because I've worked on the show floors during the production builds, and you still see a lot of timber being used. You still see a lot of stuff after the show is finished just being ripped out and thrown into a skip. And I suppose there's that other element that organizers can maybe tackle as well, which is not their customer, their sort of audience facing communications, but what they're doing to sort of address these issues
yeah.
as well in terms of their builds and their breakdowns.
Yes, I think is a really interesting point, and I think there is definitely scope for events to talk around that space. I mean, it would be very interesting. I just saw that before coming on air that a sustainability show that's aimed at consumers is
Right.
coming along, and I think it's in October, November time, I think, and it's billing itself as the first sort of show that's a consumer facing show around that subject. Now that would be a very interesting show to see how they're
Absolutely, yeah.
handling build
Yeah.
up and breakdown, wouldn't it? I mean,
It really would, and
yeah,
I suppose twofold interest in there, that just shows and highlights what we've been talking about, which
yeah,
is this increase in social responsibility that's felt, across all consumers, and that
yeah,
I've felt, in that if there's demand for it, if there's demand for a show, that means that somebody else is sensing that there is a
yeah,
big enough audience to warrant coming to this event to learn about how they can further improve an attitude that they probably already adopted.
yeah,
But
yeah.
you're absolutely right. It's a great opportunity for them as an event organizer as well, to showcase how it can be done correctly.
Yeah, I'd be very interested to see what they're doing. I think because if any show's going to do it, surely that's going to be where it's happening.
You
But
you would you would hope
I
so.
think they're expecting, or I mean, I've seen a press statement. So and between now and October is a long. I think it's October. I'm 100% sure it's October. It's a very long time, and things could change. But they're aiming to. I think aiming for about 20,000 people is what they're hoping for, consumers.
Sure.
Don't know if they'll get that number, but they're obviously you don't launch a show if you don't think there's an appetite. So
Quite right. And exactly. If there's a show there, that means that somebody's done their market research and there's an audience. And anybody who's listening to this, who's ever been involved in any form of conference or trade show, knows that you don't commit to it unless you're pretty confident that there's going to be sponsors and visitors
yeah. So
prepared to
yeah,
come into that. And it's big business now, isn't it, this whole
yeah,
subject? Aside from this social responsibility that we've talked about from an audience point of view, we shouldn't shy away from the fact that it is big business now, isn't it? The
yeah,
subject of sustainability from a
yeah,
supplier point of view, from all aspects of it. We talked about paper cups and things like that,
yeah.
but it ultimately, where there's a demand, there is business.
It's absolutely, and it's a dimension to many companies or their products or services, their USPs. The sustainability element is often one of those. You'll often hear companies where they say, it's the it's the greenest whatever, or it's, everything's recyclable, or everything, it's a feature of lots of products and services, because that's what audiences want and expect, and so companies are meeting that demand, let alone all the players that are innovating in that space. When you look at the energy sector, wind and solar, and all the whole host of innovations that are a natural byproduct of the environmental piece. But these days I think there's whole rafts of business to be had out of that sort of eco space, so which is exciting too.
I'd be very curious to see, I mean, and to put it into some context, Louise, for people listening to this, because we're never quite sure when particular episodes are going to air and actually drop, as I say. Is that we're recording this early May, 9th of May, and the summer festival season is upon us. And I would say that certainly if you rewind 10, 15 years, the festival industry was very, very guilty of allowing its audiences and its attendees to really get away with taking a piss, for want of a better phrase, when it comes to sustainability. And I'd be curious to see, particularly with the pandemic creating this very clear break in festivals and a new audience, a younger generation maybe starting to go to their first festivals with this bigger air of social responsibility, whether or not we'll see some of the images that we've seen in the past, the fields left with thousands of discarded tents and people just, this disposable culture that we almost got into in the last decade. It does slowly seem to be eradicating itself and working its way out. But festivals, for me, always offer a really big indication as to what values the audiences that have attended it hold, and how much cleanup is required.
You hope, don't you? Because you sort of think, oh, surely it'll look different. Though I am, as you were talking, I was reminded of, don't remember if you remember the image just during, I don't know whether lockdown had just finished or what have you, and it was like the first day everyone headed to a beach, and there was this horrendous beach.
Yeah, Bournemouth Beach.
A sea of rubbish. And I just thought, oh gosh, that is so depressing.
Is.
So I hope so. I mean, to be fair to the festival community, if you like, those festival organisers, you look at Glastonbury, the iconic festival, which has been going on for such a long time, and I think they've been very aware of the challenge that comes with just having thousands and thousands of people.
A quarter of a million people on site.
Who've got all sorts of values, who are in all sorts of states when they're there anyway, so they're they wouldn't all abandon rubbish in their own homes, but they're sort of in festival mode, and it's herd instinct and what have you. And but those festival organisers have worked consequently, that I think they've tried to do as much as they can to mitigate against what's gone on by doing they've been very socially minded. And you look at the whether it's building affordable housing, funding affordable housing in their area for young people to be able to get affordable rents around the area of Pilton and things like, you read about these great initiatives that you think, yes, I think at their heart, a lot of those original organisers have always been very right-minded around all of these subjects. It's just that sheer volume of people, and whether us, which is the challenge overall, isn't it? If us as a planet, we all need to be sharpening up our green act rather than just expecting a few to do it for us.
Absolutely, and certainly, I would say to an event, festivals particularly, have led the way in the events industry in terms of pushing sustainability, eradicating single-use plastic, going for plant-based options, catering for that increased social responsibility. I think it's very much my take is the audiences. I'd be curious to see if the audience attitude, because you can lead a horse to water and all of that, but no matter how good your comms are pre-event to say, look, please don't leave rubbish, please don't just abandon your tents, please don't just leave sleeping bags, we've got to pay for people to pick all that up. You can do that every day for a year, and if it's muddy on the Monday morning and everyone's been rained on all night, inevitably that's what happens. So
Everyone
I
will.
think it's really is an indicator as to how seriously audiences are taking this
Yeah,
subject seriously to
yeah.
as to what will happen and what pictures ultimately we will see on the Monday or Tuesday mornings
Won't it be
come
interesting?
come
Let's
come come the summertime.
let's hope it's the weather's wonderful for everyone and they all take their tents home. That would be the dream.
We would love to think so. We've been talking on the podcast today to our guest Louise Findlay-Wilson, who's the MD at Energy PR, on the subject of consumers and their attitudes and their consciousness towards how companies and events that they interact with operate their own social responsibilities, I suppose, their attitudes towards operating greener events, sustainable events, and how that ultimately drives some of their activities and operations in order to cater for those audience expectations. Now, Louise, thanks very much for joining the podcast. First time guest today, and it's been great to meet you and share some of your thoughts on here. If people want to find out a little bit more about Energy PR, what you guys are doing and what you're up to, some of the projects you're involved in, where do they go to do that?
Oh, right. Well, I think you're very kindly going to provide the Energy PR website for us.
Indeed, for any of our podcast watchers on the Event Industry News website, the website is now on the screen now for you. energypr.co.uk,
Super.
nice and simple.
Yeah.
For anybody, of course, listening to today's podcast, you
Yeah.
can go over to eventindustrynews.com and check out the video versions. But energypr.co.uk is where to go.
Absolutely.
And I'm absolutely certain that if you went into whatever social media platform you choose to engage
Yeah.
with and search for Energy PR, you'll find you.
You will. I mean, Twitter it's simple. Again, it's just at Energy PR, and the energy is the full spelling of energy. So ENERGY.
No crazy spellings that seem to be prevalent in all sorts of industries and new startups nowadays. They want to go with crazy spellings of names.
Well, we're probably a bit crazy, but we're a bit old school too.
Our thanks to Louise for joining us today. And as I said, if you are watching this already, hello to you on eventindustrynews.com. Don't forget that you can navigate around some of the other areas of the website and check out the latest news, features and supplements that have been published within the eventindustrynews.com platform. And of course, if you are also wanting to tune into audio versions of all of our podcasts, just go to wherever you get your podcasts from, search for the Event Industry News podcast, and you will find us, and you can download and listen to us when you're out on your commute. It's a glorious spring day up in Yorkshire today where I'm based, so maybe you're out and about walking and you want to have a little listen to this podcast while you're stretching your legs. Either way, it's great to have you on board with the podcast, whether you're on the website or via one of your podcast platforms. We're going to wrap up today's episode now. Our thanks once again to Louise Findlay-Wilson from Energy PR for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing everybody on the next edition of the Event Industry News podcast. Goodbye to you all.
Bye-bye.